this video, we're going to talk about work orders and the different ways of entering them into the Buildxact system. Before we launch into it though, just a really quick point here between the difference between purchase orders and work orders. Now, we've covered this previously in the purchasing video already, but essentially just to summarize, purchase orders are everything outside of your business. Or another way to say this is everything that you're getting a bill or an invoice for. Or another way to think about this is that purchase orders are things that are going to eventually go to your accounting system. On the other hand though, work orders are virtually all other cases. Typically that'll be internal costs or costs that don't need to go to your accounting system. And for the majority of people, this will encompass labor costs, timesheeting costs, or tracking costs for things that you own, such as perhaps an excavator, where it doesn't make sense to send yourself a bill, because obviously, again, that's not going to go into your accounting system. It's something you own, and obviously nobody's going to pay that. Now, we're going to go through the two different ways of creating work orders. If you've been through the purchasing video already, then the ways of doing this are very similar to how purchase orders get created, but there are a few unique little differences that we'll touch on. Now, I'm going to start in the cost category, and I'm going to go find this labor item here. And what I want to do is grab that order. It'll pop up as though it's going to be a purchase order. And you can see in the top right here, because 99% of the time, that's really what it's going to actually be. But for this case, again, it's actually going to be a work order, something that's internal. So we'll change that around a little bit. So a few changes up here will be the work order changes to, it'll become to assign to instead. And the other main difference is the status menu, where we had previously had received, we've now got completed, because instead of receiving a bill, we're actually just ticking something off. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this out. And worth a really quick mention here is you can absolutely send work orders to people as a way of signing a tasks. We don't see this a huge amount, but it absolutely can be done. And if you're going to do it very much like a purchase order, you just fill out all the boxes before you ultimately go save and send. However, we won't go through it in this video. I'm just going to say this has been a labor item for this, and I did this one. And most commonly, we'll see people who have one contact in their business, and they'll just essentially assign things to them. We also do see people who have all their different employees loaded in and actually assign it to each individual employee for more specific tracking. And there's pros and cons to this, but ultimately it's quicker and easier just to assign it to one particular business or one entity, and then maybe add notes or add different lines for different people later on. But really, once you start doing this, you'll figure out which is the best way for yourself. We're also going to have a little talk about a timesheet application that we plug in with. This will come in handy a little bit later on, but for now, let's just select myself. And moving on down, we had this many hours at this much an hour allocated. And if I go up and say completed, same process. If I was receiving an order, tell it what, who, and the next steps as it moves through the process along are. It'll pop up at this window saying, great, did you complete what you estimated? And Buildxact needs to know what actually happened when you completed it, so it can compare the estimate. So if I went through these and I did all these doors, and let's say it was a bit of a superhuman effort and I came out with a few extra hours, what it's going to do is really just compare the dollar value against the dollar value, but it's still using this many hours at this figure to calculate that out. And I'll just put that in now. Note that this is totally fine to change to these lump figures, and you don't have to say how many hours at what rate. You could just put a lump sum figure if you can keep that in your mind, because ultimately it really just cares about that final dollar figure. So I'll pop that in, and it does the same thing as if it would for a purchase order. It compares the estimate, first actuals, and then tells me how I've tracked. Now, this is really powerful if you are just estimating all of your hours and you want to go back and see how you actually stacked up against that estimate. So that's really method one, and that's perfect, again, if you want to put it against a specific line. Option two, as we've covered in an example before, for purchasing order like this as well, you can go straight into work orders and you can just add a new line and just say labor for siding. And if we're just adding up multiple bulk timesheets with multiple people, generally this is going to be an easier way of doing it. And you can add several lines at a time, and you can say, we've got Tom and Steve and all the other guys and how many hours they did. And again, I'm just putting in those unit costs there. You would have noticed in the previous one that I left it at the estimate rate. Now, if you are entering them in, the only real consideration is that you can compare apples with apples. So, i.e., if you budgeted this at a cost, right, and then you added markup, then it should be putting in the cost right here. If you budget this as a charge out rate and you haven't really added any markup on the Buildxact system to this figure, then you should be putting in the charge out rate. Because what we want to be able to do is really just see what the numbers are the numbers correct? And this will be thrown off if we estimate it at the charge out rate and then we put them in at the cost rate. It'll show we're maybe making a ton of money even though our hours might actually be exactly the same. So again, just really a quick point there. Now I'm going to save this, and as with the purchase order example, I'm just going to tell it which category you put it into, and it'll say it's been completed. And again, it'll pop up, did you complete the estimated time? Looks good, happy with that. You can obviously be, again, as detailed as you want here, but just going to save and close this, and we'll add a new order and back in the actual costing screen, or you can go into the category and it will have 2 added lines like that. And as with purchasing, or as with any ordering really, it's tracking against the total cost. And it's a great way, again, to still compare whether you're over budgeting or under budgeting or selling yourself short when you quote those jobs up. Final little quick note here, as we have the option to connect again with the timesheeting application, as I mentioned earlier. There's a whole video for this, but the main reason for touching on it here is that it does get used quite a bit, and we've had quite a bit of interest in it. And really just to summarize how it works very briefly, and what we'll do is we'll actually send the list of categories to that other software, and the people on site will then have the ability to log in and say, yep, I worked on this category for this many hours. That other software will then know the charge rates or the cost rates and bring that back. And it actually feels very much identical to how we've done it here, except it'll automatically pull that information across. So again, it's a really quick way of adding new lines and tracking against cost categories. Well worth a look, particularly if you have a large number of staff on site. And for now, that's work orders.